Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Anchorman, the legend of Ron Burgundy. So, I'm here going on and reviewing Anchorman, and I'm like, you know what? I love the absurdity of this film. We really have so many good actors all in one film. But you have to go on and say that, like, Steve Carell, like, delivering these, like, absurdities within this film, where it seems like everyone else is to go on and, like, have something, like, legit that they are going to say at some moment. And then Steve Carell comes in and he's like, I love lamp, I love floor, I love this, I love. And we have, of course, like the very first line in this movie that he used to like early deliver, besides his introduction and him mentioning his IQ, is him eventually going on as Brick to say like that he doesn't understand what they're yelling about, and he's like loud noises. So we just go on and have Brick, who's probably the most hilarious part of this film. But then also be like, I think the most funniest things is when you can't really even understand what anybody is really saying. They're just making yells or wails and whatever, and you're like, what is he saying? What's going on here? Like, and so it's like Timmy down the well. Like, what's going on? So we go into this film and we have supposedly this movie based on true events, and names and locations were changed to protect the innocent and all of this stuff. And I'm like, I can't believe that for a second. Like, I can go on and probably say that maybe there was some times when somebody went on and like went behind the scenes and was kind of looking on as a number of news anchors were to do their job, but like I could not fathom that there, of course, is to be this bickering between certain news channels about ratings and how they're number one and this person's number two and this one's three and four and five and whatever. And then we go on and have a huge Anchorman like war battle at some part of this movie just because we can, for reasons. Sure. To where people are throwing tridents and grenades are being held and goofy things are happening within this movie. But also an absurd love story is somehow happening within this film. So much so that it is ruining the lives of probably a number of people within this film. And so we go on, and this movie is just like, no matter how many times you've probably seen it, it's just fun. It's so goofy, it's so obscure, but man, there's just certain lines that will always be funny in this movie. Just absurd funny, but still funny nonetheless. So that's what I can really praise this movie for, is yeah, it's goofy, odd, and absurd, but at the end of the day, it still slaps, if you know what I mean. It still nails. It still goes on and makes you go, whoa, that was a film I saw. So with that said, I think this is to be like, even though it's like a funny film, I would still have to have an honest grading of this film. I feel like this movie is just fun and oakley dokley. It's okay at the end of the day. And I can't really go on and say, like, oh, this is a great film, just because of its absurdity and just its kind of, like, comedy that just feels like a random chucking of things. Like, how we go on and we just have to have, like, love compared to afternoon delight. And they just start going on and singing like sky rockets in flight, boo, afternoon delight, chicka. And I'm like, what? What is up with this film? Like, I've seen it, like, now this would probably be maybe twice. Like, I don't really remember the first time. because everybody would go on and talk about it and how great this film was, and how eventually when the sequel came out, people were like, oh my god, they're making a sequel, I'm so jazzed. And I'm like, okay, what, like Anchorman, question mark, people. So yeah, with that said, let's just go on into spoilers, because teeing it up, it's a pretty basic film. This movie is currently available on Netflix, so that's a convenient part of everybody who can go on and finally see this film if they haven't already. Uh, so the teeing up part is really just simple. We have it to where Ron Burgundy is to be head anchor of this news bulletin, and it seems that he always has to have his other anchors behind him at some point, just kind of in the background, just like, hey, So we have it to where Ron Burgundy is to at some point have Veronica Corningstone get involved in the uh, on this news channel, as we come to find out that Ron Burgundy is to have the #1 news channel. And all of a sudden, at one point, we have one thing that leads to another, and then Veronica is going on and eventually taking the place of Ron Burgundy, and I'll get into hopefully more spoilers about that, what happens with that. And so it seems that Veronica is to go on and keep this news channel to be #1, and all of a sudden, one slip of Ron Burgundy is to get him fired, and then eventually there is a whole story about the resurrection of Ron Burgundy within this one film, and him getting back to eventually just be the guy who is to be in front of the camera speaking. So, with that said, I think it's about that time to just go into spoilers. It's a very simplistic movie about romance and news anchor story things and such. So, and a lot of this movie is just go ahead and just check it out anyways. So at the end of the day, let's go on into that double five time territory, because it's about that time yet again to just go into this thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time you get to spoil this movie. So, why did he have to fire 3 shots instead of 967? Because I felt lucky. Anyways, pushing on. So, in the very beginning of this, we have to say that there is this movie based on true events, and names and things were changed for some goofy reason that I don't quite understand, and I can't really buy that every single bit of this was all really all that true. Bugaboo. Anyways, so we go on, we have Ron Burgundy, who is to get ready to be on the news, and so he's drinking scotch, and he's saying up all these absurd things, kind of preparing his voice, and he's like, I love scotch, scotchy, scotch, scotch, all that goofy, weird bizarreness. So we have Ron immediately getting ready for the 6 o'clock news, and so at some point in one of these times of which that Ron is to deliver the news, at one point he is to go on and read the teleprompter exactly how it's delivered, to where we have Ron who's mentioned, I'm Ron Burgundy, and so we have it to where, of course, the kind of lead guy behind the camera, who is Ed Harkin, who is to mention to the other guys, who's like, well, hey, like, who's manning the teleprompter? Because you know anything that Ron is to go on and read from the teleprompter, he's to read it verbatim. And so, like, come on. So we have it to where Ron is to go on and do another great news, to the point of where Ed is to go on and tell all of the Anchormen that they are to be #1 within, like, their network. And so they're all like high-fiving, and they're like, yeah, like, we did it. And so we then go on and are to have these guys have this lavish party, a party that they've like been to like for the last 12 years. And so we go on and we have it to where we have a bunch of the anchors who are to go on and kind of tell you who they all are, going on and having guys like Champ, who are of course going to tell you like they're going to possibly do some absurd things in this party, like get naked or eventually kind of go on and beat up people and whatever. Uh, we go and have Fantana, who is actually to be Paul Rudd here, who is to seemingly be a ladies' man, and so like that's the kind of thing that he is known for. And we have Brick, who's to mention that he has an IQ of 48, and so eventually he was to be like told by some doctor that I guess he was to, of course, be uh, special in some way. Let's just say. So we go on, and then we have Ron, who, of course, is to deliver this special bulletin that everybody needs to go on and pay attention to, as Ron is going to deliver a cannonball into this pool, and when he gets out of the pool, we have Fantana that is to go on and give Ron these women, and Ron is instead spotting Veronica to where he is just tempted by this woman and wanting to go on and figure out a way that he can get to her. And so when Ron is to try to do anything that is to go on and persuade Veronica to get with Ron, it seems that Ron is failing at what he is to go on and do. So Veronica is to go on and leave this party, and so we transition to the very next day, where all of a sudden the Channel 9 news that is actually to have Wes Mantooth being the number 2 anchor in the network, going on and kind of back talking Ron Burgundy and a number of the other anchormen. And so, really, there's this kind of back and forth thing going on between the two of them, and Ron is to go on and consistently, like, say it's like, well, hey, like, you guys are number 2, so, like that is the real the joke here is just the fact that it's like, well, hey, like even though you guys are to go on and like have some jokes and whatever, you guys are still like left to be number 2. So the news guys are to walk on, and so later on in this movie we have Ron Burgundy and the other anchors making their way to meet up with the Channel 9 News again with Wes Mantooth. And so Mantooth is to go on and say that he hates Ron Burgundy. And so we go on and we have Mantooth, who is to have a knife, and all the guys start whipping out these weapons, and then all of a sudden the Channel 2 news that is actually to be put together with Frank Van Chart, who is actually Luke Wilson in this movie, is to go on and he's to whip out all of his weapons because, like, hey, you can't go on and not be involved in this. And then all of a sudden the public news ends up getting involved, which is actually with Tim Robbins, and Tim Robbins is to go on and whip out all of his guys and all of his weapons. And then we all of a sudden have Ben Stiller, who, of course, is to be Arturo Mendez. And he, of course, is to be involved with the Spanish news anchors. And so they're all getting out their weapons. And so we go on, we have Ron, who is eventually spotting that we, of course, have Brick, who has this grenade, and he's holding onto it. It's like, how did you get a grenade? And he's like, I don't know. So they go on, and they all start to circle around, and, like, they're mentioning that there's, like, bilingual warfare going on here. And so we then go on, and everybody's to battle everybody as Ron is to tell them to, like, go on and, like, and give them the ground rules, and tells them, like, hey, like, just don't hit the face, and that's about it. So we go on, and we have tridents being thrown, Anchorman being killed, and eventually all this carnage in our wake. I think certain Anchormen are being lit on fire at some points. And so we have it to where Mantooth is also to stab into Ron Burgundy, and is to again, like, confide to Ron of how much he hates him. So all the carnage is to go on here, and so we have it to where all of a sudden we cue them going right back to the anchor, or the news studio, and Ron's like, wow, like, that escalated quickly. And so, like, these guys are going off about what all they did, and that possibly Brick is gonna have to go on and possibly find, like, a hideaway for a while, because he killed somebody technically. So like, I know that's, like, the whole, like, Anchorman battle is, like, way later in the movie, but I wanted to get that done right away, so I can kind of cover all of that stuff, and then eventually just kind of get towards the ending here. So we go on and have Ron making it to the anchor, the news, the place where they go on and do their work. And so we have Ed bringing in all of the anchors and telling them, it's like, well, breaking it to them, it's like, well, hey, like, you guys are all going to be working with Veronica Corningstone. And so they're like, what? It's like, how could you? And so all the guys are starting to rattle off how, like, this will be, like, a problem. And Brick is mentioning that a girl on her period could attract bears. And so we have Fontana that is going on of, like, yeah, like, you don't know how dangerous that is. That's causing a real problem. And so we go on, and we have these guys, like, we also have it to our champ is mentioning how he wants to pour barbecue sauce on Veronica's butt. And so, but we go on, and we have Veronica that's coming in to want to know, like, what she, of course, is to go on and do. And so, as far as, like, getting her office, and so Ed is to tell her, it's like, well, hey, like, kind of find a desk in the bullpen right now, but eventually we'll get your desk legitimately ready. So Veronica is to go on and at some point get a legitimate desk, but for now. So we have all these guys who are wanting to attempt to throw themselves at Veronica, and one by one they start going on and trying to ask her out. So we end up having Champ, who ends up going first, and of course he is to basically try to go on and be at Veronica's desk and, like, try to look like he's going for some pencil, but instead he starts to grab onto Veronica, and Veronica's like, are you trying to grab my chest? And Champ is like, well, yes, I am. And so we have to our chances to go on and mention like, well, how about you and me go on a date together? We'll have some chicken and we'll have some love making and whatever. And so I'm paraphrasing here, but it is what it is. And so Veronica is to go on and punch Champ in the nuts and he falls over. And so that I guess did not work. So we have it to where Fantana is to go on and use a certain kind of perfume that is to be called Sex Panther, and supposedly 60% of the time it works every time. And Ron's like, well, I don't know how that works, but but good luck with that. So Fantana is to, or Fantana, how do you, I don't know how you pronounce it. I'm gonna go with Fantana because that sounds like the way of which that I would like to just pronounce this name. So Fantana is to go on and eventually meet up with Veronica, and Veronica is like, God, what is that smell? Fantana's like, well, like I don't know, and so she's saying that it's like a diaper with Indian food and all this stuff, and so all of a sudden Fantana is to realize that he is to smell horrible, and they go on and they have guys with like power washers trying to like wash off the smell, and they're kind of mentioning the fact and like it's been a while since they've had this kind of bad of a smell. So Fantana is out. So we then go on and have Brick, who's to meet up with Veronica and is to mention something about a party and pants. And so we have Veronica that is to have to figure out the joke of it all. And so Veronica is saying to Brick, it's like, well, you telling me that there's a party in your pants and I'm invited? And Brick is like, yeah, that's what I meant. And so Veronica is like, well, no, I do not want to go to a party that's inside your pants. And then Brick is asking somebody else, like, well, hey, do you want to go? And the guy is like, no. So Brick is like, oh, okay. And so he just runs off and then is to seemingly have a bunch of things fall over. He's like, I'm okay. So we now have to lead this up to Ron Burgundy. And so Ron Burgundy is to now mention, it's like, well, hey, like I'm gonna give her a gun show. So Ron is all of a sudden lifting these dumbbells and he's getting to like an absurd number like 1001, 1002, 1003. He's like, oh the burn, and he starts making up these goofy names for muscle. He's like, these gluteus maximus and the shoulder bryphon and and whatever. And I'm like, okay, whatever you have to say there. So we go on and we have Veronica that is just so upset with the fact that Ron is to go into such a horrible route to try and get her interested in Ron. And Ron is to, of course, be shirtless, and then he throws on his shirt, and he's like, no, like, I just can't get to the gym. This is the only way I can work out. And Veronica's like, sure, right. You're lying to me. So Ron goes on, and he's like, well, like, here's the thing. Like, I know what it's like to be lonely in a new town. So if anything, like, how about I just go on and I just take you, to help you kind of kind of know where to go when you need to go into town. And Veronica's like, well, that's nice, like that's a nice gesture. And Ron's like, oh, okay, like that's what we'll do then. Should I pick you up at 8 o'clock? And so Ron and Veronica are to go on and are to make it to this one spot where they can kind of see all of San Diego. And we go on and have it to where Ron is trying to figure out why exactly it's called San Diego. And so like he is to go on and say that it's like some absurd reason why it's called that. And Veronica is like, well, no, I think it's actually like had called been had been called before Saint Diego. And so Ron's like, oh, okay. So both of them go out to this restaurant, and all of a sudden we have Ron, who is to be pulled up on stage to go on and play this jazz flute song. And so Ron is to go on and say, "Oh my god, like sure, I'll go on and do this. Like I was completely caught unprepared by any of this. This is all a surprise." And so Ron all of a sudden is to shimmy this flute from out of his sleeve, and then is to go on and just with this flute as I'm going on and doing weirdly. So like it seems that at first Ron is to go on and blow into this flute and nothing has really come out. But then all of a sudden we have like the perfect flute jazz thing going on, and then Ron's like, "Oh, okay, now we've got it." And so Ron goes and busts out this jazz flute, and we had it before where of course Veronica was very tempted by Ron from seeing him shirtless and just like no like I can't go on and just fall in love so easily with Ron. But so all of a sudden Ron is to go on and deliver this jazz flute performance, and so both Ron and Veronica are taken with one another, and they all of a sudden are to be put into this bed situation where like I think Ron or like Veronica's to tell Ron like take me to Pleasure Town, and then all of a sudden we have these absurd rainbows and goofy like goofy like acid freaking scenes where like people riding on unicorns and rainbows are happening, and it's bizarre. and, and so we go on and then have Ron, who is to have Veronica tell him, it's like, well, hey, we need to keep this love between us secret. Like, you can't go on and tell anybody. And Ron's like, of course, like, I won't tell a soul. And then immediately when he goes on to his office the next day, he's shouting to the rooftops that Ron and Veronica are together, even to the point where also he turns around, and when Ron is on like the news, he is to go on and mention that he of course is to be sleeping with Veronica. So Veronica at first is to go on and get these kind of fluff pieces where she of course is at first doing this cat fashion show, and she's like, seriously, this is what I'm gonna be doing. And so Veronica goes on and does it, and then eventually is to have her kind of sign off thing eventually when she becomes Anchor, but she doesn't have anything quite yet. So Veronica is to go on and ask Ed, like, what's her next piece. And so it seems that Veronica is to go on and get a piece about the world's best recipe for meatloaf. And Veronica's like, seriously, this is what I'm getting for these piece, another fluff piece. And so we go on, and Ron is to, I guess, be spending so much time with Veronica that all of a sudden all the anchors are realizing that like Ron doesn't have time for them anymore. And so we all of a sudden have guys like Champ that are to kind of miss Ron and miss his smell and his musk and his scent and his whatever. Aren't all of those the same thing? And so Champ is all of a sudden just very like clingy to Ron, as if asking him to want to have them move in together at some point. And we have it to where Ron and Fontana and everybody is kind of telling him, it's like, you know what, like, how about you, like, sit out for a couple of plays? Like, maybe you should stop talking for a while. Like, and Champ's like, yeah, maybe you're right. So we go on, and so we have it to where, like, Veronica is working hard and on these kind of silly pieces, but eventually something will happen for her. So we go on and we have it to where Ron is to be driving with this burrito and having his dog Baxter in his car, as we've had it to where Ron is to meet up with Baxter in his house, and the dog is consistently barking, and Ron is to, of course, treat this like Lassie, and is to go on and say like stuff about loneliness or meeting a girl and this and that. All right. So we have Ron, who is in his car eating a burrito with his dog Baxter. And so we have it where all of a sudden he's enjoying this burrito, and he all of a sudden has to have this biker on the side of his vehicle. And so Ron is to get so full with this burrito that he chucks this burrito at this motorcyclist, who all of a sudden is to lose control of his motorcycle and is to get his motorcycle, like, totaled, I guess, to the point of him not being able to use his motorcycle. We have at a point where Judd Apatow was to go on and say through an interview with Inside of You with Michael Rosenbaum that at some point Judd Apatow would have loved to eventually have a Jack Black, Will Ferrell like motorcycle movie, but I guess that never was to really happen at some point. So, but we go on and we have it to where Ron Burgundy is to get out of his vehicle to see what is happening with this motorcyclist. And so the motorcyclist is to ask Ron if there's anything that Ron is to love. And so Ron is to go on and say, it's like, well, yeah, like, I love this dog. And so we go on and we have the motorcyclist that takes the dog and punts it, and then eventually, like, knocks it out of this out onto this water. And so Ron is assuming that his dog is either dead or that his dog is punted. And so Ron, of course, is now distraught and is eventually calling Fantana and mentioning about his dog eventually getting punted and all this stuff. And he's trying to decipher what the heck Ron is even saying. And so Fantana is to remind Ron that, hey, like, you're on in a like, we're on the news in a number of minutes here, like, are you gonna make it? So Ron is now running like crazy to make his way to the broadcast. And so we have it to where Ed is to kind of wait for Ron, and Veronica is like, well, hey, like, I'm here and I've gone on and done a number of things, and I now want to go on and like, I'll take Ron's place if he's not here. So Ed's hands are tied, so he goes on to, of course, have Veronica go on and read the news. So we have it to where, like, everything was to go off without a hitch, and Ron finally arrives at the news. And so we have it to where Veronica is mentioning to Ron that she was to go on and be lead anchor, and Ron's like, wait a minute, is this all a joke? Like, are you guys pulling my leg? No, I'm here, let's go on. And Veronica's like, well, we were already on, like, you were too late. So Ron all of a sudden realizing that now Veronica is to be co-lead anchor, we then have it to where there is to be pranks to be ensued between both Ron and Veronica. We have Ron who's consistently calling Veronica and like calling her as her doctor and saying that she's pregnant and that she needs to go on and leave for whatever reason, or Ron is calling as her boss and telling her that she has been transferred to Moscow and that it's going to be really cold there and all these absurd things. So we go on and have Ron and Veronica, and these things are to consistently escalate to the point of both Ron and Veronica getting into fights and going on and eventually like macing one another and like fighting one another and all of this craziness. And so we have a moment when Veronica is going and talking to a girl named Helen, and Veronica is to realize that Helen is to say that Ron is to read anything from the teleprompter no matter what. And so Ron is to all of a sudden do, at the end of this news broadcast, he is to, of course, go on and is to say F you San Diego. And so if everyone was to always go on and love Ron Burgundy for the news he was to deliver before, that one slip up is to have all of a sudden everybody like loathe and hate Ron Burgundy to the point of everybody wanting Ron Burgundy's head and wanting him fired. And whenever Ron is to talk to anybody from San Diego, they are to talk about how much they hate him. So Ron all of a sudden is talking to Ed, and Ed's like, well, hey, like, my hands are tied. I'm going to have to fire you. And Ron's like, no, like, you can't go on and fire me. So all of a sudden, Veronica is to go on and be lead anchor, and Ron is to be in this drunken spiral where eventually he's at this bar going on and eventually sing random words of afternoon delight. So, as well as we had a moment where both Ron and Veronica, like we did have the one moment when Ron was to mention about their relationship on the news, and Veronica was trying to tell Ron, like, I thought we were to keep this secret, and Ron is like, well, yeah, but I needed to shout it to the rooftops that I love you, Veronica. And like now we go on and we have like Ron and Veronica at a distance between one another, and now they hate one another. So Ron is to go on and be at this bar while it seems that Veronica is to go on and do this exclusive news report about a panda who is giving birth. So because it seems like they're kind of really having this be the big news story of a panda giving birth to another child for how rare that is. So we go on and we have Veronica that is covering this story, and we have one of the public news anchors who is to go on and dump Veronica because she is to get the perfect shot of this panda possibly giving birth. And so Veronica is now in this cage with a number of bears. And so we go on and we have Ed who has lost his Veronica. Now he's going on and calling Ron Burgundy through this fan to then go on and get Ron Burgundy back and make his way to this zoo. We also had the really funny moment when we, of course, had Garth Holiday that is to have been upset about Ron going and saying F you San Diego. And so Garth Holiday is going on and telling Ron, it's like, you have a poop mouth. Like, everything that you say is poop, and this and that. And then he runs off all crying and sad. And we have it to where Ron is like saying like, well, hey, like, you know what, if I gave you a couple of bucks from my wallet, like, would all this go away? And so Holiday is to walk off, and so like that answer isn't to be answered, of course, or that question is to not be answered. So Ron is to, after this phone call, go on and clean shaven himself with the exclusion of a mustache. And we have, of course, the bartender who's Danny Trejo, who's going on like, oh my god, this guy cleans up fast. So all of a sudden, Ron is to blow this weird seashell and to hopefully have his news anchors assemble. And all of a sudden, they do because they're already like at this bar playing pool, and the whole entire time that Ron has been there, so too have they. We also had a moment when Ron, of course, was to eventually be uh, very disheveled and very grizzled. We, of course, have uh, like the Anchorman going on and seeing Ron, and we have Fontana that is to go on and say like, yeah, like we can't talk to you anymore. Like we were told by Ed that if we talked to you, we would get fired. So we go on and we have, of course, the guys that are to eventually show up when Ron is to blow the horn of this seashell. And we also have Baxter, who is to hear this horn also, and is to somehow or another make his way to this same zoo where Ron is going to eventually be. So Ron all of a sudden is to make his way to this zoo. And so Ron, of course, is to notice that Veronica is within these bears, and so Veronica is trying desperately to be very quiet so none of these bears attack her. And we have Ron who's screaming at Veronica like, "Hey, how did you get in there? What how did this all happen?" And so Ron is to want to go on and help out Veronica, and so he jumps into this area of bears. And so all of a sudden, the rest of the Anchormen all decide to jump in after and go on and start attacking all these bears. We have at one point where Brick is just riding one of the bears. We have Fantana that is supposedly trying to like punch and battle with these bears. We have, of course, Champ, who is to be slung all around by one of these bears and is to be tossed. So eventually what ends up happening is that we have Baxter who is to talk to this mama bear and is to get these other bears to go away. And so all of a sudden, once the bears are to now to kind of to walk off, we then have a ladder being put into this kind of bear enclosure. And so we have Veronica that makes it out of the thing, and then eventually, while Ron is on this ladder, we have Mantooth that is going on and is to tell Ron, it's like, you know what, like I hated you before, but now like I feel differently. And so we go on. We have Mantooth who's to tell like his news channel that like I feel like we now have to go on, and when we say the word redemption, we have to spell it with an RON. And so Ron, or so we have Mantooth that is to just kind of walk away, and so we have it to, of course, where Ron is to take over this whole panda interview, or this whole panda uh, thing, and is to go on and eventually do it with Veronica after they go on and kiss. So really after that, like we have it to where things are to wrap up within this film. Everyone is to leave happy, and so with that said, I think I'm going to leave happy so I can go on and get out of here. I apologize for all the technical problems of which that I had in this review. Like it feels like lately there's just been some time where a lot of storage has just been ate up for whatever reason within this tablet. So maybe at some point I'm gonna have to go on and get some memory card or something like that, so that way I can go on and eventually have more storage upon this tablet. For whatever reason, yeah, like things have just been like malfunctioning technically lately within these reviews. So that's always great to eventually have that effing happen. But with that said, I think I'm just going to get out of here to go on and try to hope that I can get this clip together. So with that said, I'm just going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.